Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 5, Episode 4, Nor the Battle to the Strong. This episode aired October 21st, 1996. Before we talk about this one, anything to say about last week's episode?
No, it was perfect.
Do you remember what the episode was? Because I had to look it up.
Yes, it was the one where Worf fell in love with Grilka.
Oh, yes.
It was the episode where the producer, director, writers, or whoever managed to get two of their personal kinks into the show. Quite impressive.
Yeah, I had apparently completely put it out of my mind because I had to go and look it up. And I was like, what did we talk about? And I went, oh, God, that episode. So I'm sure the podcast was perfect, but the episode, not so much. Well, are you ready to talk about today's episode with the long, weird title?
Yes, although I'm a little bit concerned because have you noticed, since we started podcasting, the world seems to actually be following things that are happening in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Currently, as we're recording, the new Tsar of Russia is invading the Ukraine, and this seems horribly in line with this episode.
Yeah.
Is Deep Space Nine setting the direction of the world?
Wow, I hope not. Although we are about 6 weeks ahead in our recording, so maybe we're actually predicting the future is what's happening.
Could be.
Something like that. All right, should we get started on this episode?
Absolutely, I think we should. There'll be a lot of discussion, I can guarantee it.
Well, that is the point of the podcast.
That's true. Hopefully that's what people are tuning in for.
Yeah, they're tuning in for our witty repartee. I'm sure they're not tuning in for all the times that I have to diss the show. So in the cold open, Jake and Julian are in a runabout returning from a conference. Jake is writing an article about Julian, but he's realized how boring most of Julian's life really is. He had proposed a profile of Dr. Bashir to some journal, but now he's having second thoughts as Julian just goes on and on and on about protein anomalies, and Jake just can't even follow it. In his head, Jake says, people won't care about any of this. They want stories about life and death.
So it looks like Jake already has clickbait journalism down.
Yeah, that's a good point. He already knows that this boring stuff, nobody's going to click in and read it.
Yeah, he's already aware of what the story is that people want to read.
But also, he's being quite disrespectful, I thought, about what Julian's job actually is. It's an intellectual job. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of Julian talking and a lot of words he doesn't understand. And, you know, it's almost kind of silly for him to think, oh, I'm going to go with him to some planet to solve a plague, I think he says. And it's just like, that's not how it works generally.
Well, it's extremely difficult to make a very dry subject have wide appeal in an article. It's a real skill. I think Jake was biting off a little bit more than he could chew here, or more than he expected.
Yeah. Or else he needs to be clearer to Julian what he's looking for. Like he's looking for a personal side or something that's not just scientific, I guess, in nature.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with him. The average person doesn't want to read about protein anomalies.
But at the same time, Julian could make it more interesting.
Yeah, exactly. If he told him that's what he was looking for.
Yeah. I am going to say, I do really relate to Julian's enthusiasm here. I really liked what Siddig was doing here. Because he was like really just very enthusiastic and excited about what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And I could relate to that personally because, you know, that's what I'm like about the hardware of old video games. I love that stuff. So I was like, yeah, I can relate to Julian.
And I could relate to Jake being like, oh my God. Not really.
And you are the journalist.
That was a lifetime ago. Well, you know what they say about wishing for interesting times? Because
you wish you didn't live in them?
Yeah, because then they get a distress call from a Federation colony on Agilon Prime. They're under attack. Klingon troops have landed. The hospital is damaged and they're short on troops and supplies. And the hospital is only 50 kilometers from the front line. Julian doesn't want to go because he doesn't want to put Jake at risk. But Jake convinces him that it's a good idea. And then Jake is suddenly all excited that his article is going to have some interesting content.
Wouldn't Bashir be required to go and help a colony if he receives a distress call?
Well, it's got to matter, though, if you've got civilians on board. It has to matter.
Well, that's what I wondered.
There's probably protocol that he's violated by doing this, is my guess.
Yeah. But at the same time, I wonder if you receive a priority distress call, it really is drop everything and go.
I don't know. We've never seen that you have to do something.
Yeah.
They've always got to make judgment calls.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
It's at the captain's discretion if there are mitigating circumstances, and having your boss's kid aboard is probably a very big mitigating circumstance.
I would think so. I struggled a little bit in this episode with this ground troop stuff, because here they're talking about there's troops on the ground. I don't understand why, with the weapons they have in the future, why you would even need Klingons on the ground with bat'leths. Yeah. Is it just because they want to have a bloody battle, because it's fun for them?
I think there's a lot of things with the Klingons that they want to have this battle, that it's so enshrined in their culture. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. There's a comment later on about how they want to use bat'leths.
Oh, right. Instead of their disruptors.
Yeah, because they want that combat.
Well, I mean, Kirk might have been right about them.
Hey, I've said that before.
Well, from here we cue the theme song. Then we jump back to the station, and Quark is trying to develop a decaf ractigino for Kira. But it seems like it's pretty disgusting because she's really grossed out by it. And even Miles tries it and he's like, oh, man. Quark says the removal of caffeine from beverages has been plaguing bartenders and restaurateurs for centuries. Odo says, so much for the Quark-tigino.
Question here.
Oh.
Do you think that this is the universal translator? Because it wouldn't be caffeine for Bajorans or any other species, or Ferengi, whatever their equivalent stimulants are. So is the universal translator turning whatever the stimulant is into caffeine because that's what humans speaking English would understand?
Well, why couldn't it be caffeine?
Well, because caffeine acts on human brains a particular way. So why would it work on Bajorans or any other species?
It might not. It's a human baby.
Okay, that's a good point.
And Miles said he didn't want his baby to be addicted to caffeine.
So it could be the Ractigino has caffeine, but it has zero impact on Kira as a Bajoran.
It could be, which is why she continues to drink it while she's pregnant.
That, Kim, is some excellent headcanon there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Really good.
The best part of this whole scene was when Odo says so much for the Quark-tigino. Because he'd already named it, obviously. I thought that was funny.
That would be Quark. He definitely puts the horse before the cart.
The horse is supposed to come before the cart. Otherwise, it's pushing it.
Yeah, it's a horse-pushed cart.
Yeah. Again, though, it's like we don't know what to do with the character of Kira while the actress is pregnant. So it's just endless sort of goofball scenes like this that somebody thinks is funny, but I don't think very many women thought was funny. I don't know why they keep doing this.
Well, just to be thorough, I actually looked up on the CDC website and they recommend 1 12-ounce caffeinated coffee a day for a woman who is pregnant.
But again, this is 300 years in the future, and also she's not human.
But the baby is.
We talked about this before, but you don't think she maybe already checked with the doctor and that Miles really ought to just go with what the doctor says is okay? I don't know. It's just...
I assume Julian would probably have read the CDC guidelines.
Right, he probably wrote them at this point. I'm also going to skip the Ferengi view on pregnant women here and just jump to Sisko coming out of his office looking worried. Well, Sisko talked to Dr. Bashir and learned that he's taking Jake to Agilon Prime. And the latest reports have Klingon ground troops capturing 2 settlements there, and there are no ships in the area yet to evacuate colonists. At least there are ships on the way, like the Farragut, but they're still 2 days out. And then Dax, at the end of the scene, she makes this weird comment about how that doesn't give Sisko much time to snoop through Jake's things. I never know. What is she talking about? Why would he snoop through Jake's things?
She's just kind of wacky.
She is so weird. And even Sisko's like, oh, Dax, what are you talking about?
Well, it's something she can put on her weekly podcast of inappropriate conversations with Dax.
Yeah, it fits right into that.
Yeah.
We go back to the runabout, and Jake and Julian can't beam down to Agilon Prime, so they have to land the shuttle. Julian warns Jake that there's a lot of wounded people, and it's going to be rough, but Jake says he'll be okay. How do the Klingons not notice this runabout? There must be a ship or 2 of Klingons in orbit already. I don't know. It seemed a little suspicious to me that they could just sneak in without anybody noticing.
Yeah, I was wondering whether this is a really minor Klingon thing, where it's like just a few ships, just like one of the families has decided that they're going to seek glory. That this isn't a full Klingon invasion. It's just one of the groups.
I'll buy that. That's good headcanon.
Thank you.
Now we go to a makeshift underground hospital, and there are lots of injured people and medical personnel rushing around trying to help in this really cramped space. And Jake is shocked at the scenes and what triage really means and what it looks like.
Yeah.
There's blood everywhere, critically injured people, and lots of noise and commotion. And Julian tells Jake to just stay out of the way. Then Jake finds an injured person on the floor, and he tries to get someone to help. But one of the doctors says there's nothing they can do. He's too far gone. And she just moves on because that's what she has to do. But Jake just stares at the guy, very upset. And then another guy comes in shouting for help, saying he took a disruptor blast. Julian rushes over to him, but Julian determines it's a phaser burn, not a Klingon disruptor, and he kind of moves on from him quickly. The guy grabs Jake and says, "You weren't there, you don't know what it's like." He says they were pinned down by Klingons and some of the others in his group ran away. When he saw someone get pulled off the line for being injured, he thought, "Oh, I wish that was me." And so he took out his phaser, and then he just starts crying as he obviously caused his own injury to get out of the battle.
Shot himself in the foot.
And Jake is just like, oh my God, standing there looking at him.
Self-inflicted wound.
Yeah. Jake finds a corner and tries to sit quietly and write about what triage really means, but he says he can't really focus. He tells himself to get a grip when one of the young guys shouts for Jake to help him. He tells Jake to keep an eye on the injured guy, but the guy grabs his shirt, covering Jake in blood. It's all quite grim, and Jake is just very outside of his comfort zone.
Yeah, he gets pulled into being one of the stretcher bearers.
Later, we see Jake is helping move patients around, and eventually they show that he's changed into some of the gray work clothes that the others are wearing. They also show him seeing this really grim sight of a pile of body bags, and one of the doctors just pushing somebody into a bag is really awful.
Yeah, putting the toe tags on. It's like he goes to the mortuary for the first time and just sees these piles of bodies in there.
Piles. Oh, my God.
Did you get a real sense of MASH?
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah, it's very MASH. There's a montage of Jake helping carry gurneys of patients around, and he gets more and more covered in blood.
I think they had another one die on him, didn't they?
I think so. Later, Jake and the other young worker dude find the doctors all resting on the floor as the wave of patients finally seems to have stopped, at least for now. Back on the station, Sisko asks to see Odo, who comes to his office limping. Seems that Odo forgot he's not a changeling, and he injured himself trying to catch someone cheating at Dabo and Quarks. He jumped off the stairs intending to change form in midair, but just fell and hurt himself.
Yeah, he said he intended to turn into a Tarkalian condor.
Right.
Which he's done before. I think this is one of his favorites.
He scoffs that his people call humanoids solids when their bodies are so fragile. And Sisko agrees there are a lot of ways to get hurt. And then Odo realizes that Sisko is worried about Jake.
Oh, yeah.
Sisko talks about remembering when he was the only one who could make Jake feel better when he got hurt when he was little.
Yeah.
And he remembers when Jake was a baby, he'd slip into Jake's room just to make sure he was okay. And now Jake is a sector away in a war zone, and there's nothing he can do about it. Odo says Jake is 18, as if you should magically stop worrying about him now that he's an adult. Although, you know, with all the different aliens and the different passages of time, like the different length of years, this must be very confusing to keep straight what an adult actually means.
Right.
Well, anyway, he asks if Sisko's dad still worries about him, and Sisko says, all the time. That was very cute. And then Odo says he never realized how stressful parenting is. He's like, I don't think it's for me.
I thought this was kind of odd that Mr. Keen Observer would really not see about how stressful it was to be a parent. He watches everything. Yeah. He's really clued up on stuff. Why would he miss something like that?
Yeah, I agree. I didn't think that made a ton of sense. It might just be because this is really the first time that, or one of the first times, that Sisko's been separated from Jake. And it's different when you're worrying about someone who's not right in front of you.
Ah, right.
And so maybe this is just a different thing that Odo hasn't seen yet.
Yeah. I would have expected him, given that he'd been with the Bajorans all this time, that he would have more of an understanding of it.
Well, yeah, just even thinking about the conversation earlier where he's seeing how much Miles is clearly worrying about every single thing that Kira does. And that's, you know, just a parent worrying.
Right.
But I suppose they put that in there maybe to add to this thing that he says here, that he just never realized how stressful it is.
This was a great scene. I loved the way that this scene went 180 degrees. Initially, Sisko is finding it kind of funny with Odo, almost picking on him a bit about the So you jumped off the stairs thinking you could change and you hurt yourself.
Right.
And then when Odo says about the humanoid bodies are so fragile, the way it hits Sisko and the mood of the scene just boom.
It goes dark quickly.
Yeah.
Well, it's all made worse when Dax comes in saying the Klingons have destroyed the Farragut. Geez, these Klingons, what are they thinking?
I know, right?
This was the ship on the way to Agilon Prime, so Sisko is like, nope. And he tells Dax they're taking the Defiant, and off they go.
Oh, I absolutely love this part.
Yeah, me too.
She delivers the bad news about the Farragut. And the way he just walks straight from behind the desk and says, Dax, with me, we'll leave soon as the Defiant is ready.
He sets the baseball down and he's out the door.
It's like, boom.
Yep. Doesn't even say goodbye to Odo.
Right.
It just goes.
It's sort of the man of action. I love this.
Yep.
You could just feel the tension Sisko had sitting on the sidelines.
Yep. Now he finally had something he could do. Back to the makeshift hospital, Julian and Jake are sitting down to eat dinner. And they're covered in blood, which alone would be quite difficult, I would think. But anyway, Julian looks at his dinner and he says, I think I'll start with a lateral incision across the thigh joint.
Oh, dear.
And Jake immediately gags, and Julian rushes him out of the room so that he doesn't vomit all over the dinner table. And the other workers shrug it off as being Jake's first day in the trenches.
I like the level of sort of gallows humor that the other stretcher bearers.
There's a lot of that in this episode.
Yeah. Hearing about veterans talk about things like that, of ways of relieving the stress.
Yeah.
These terrible situations, and they'll make bad jokes or they'll laugh at silly things. It's getting that pent-up stress out of their system somehow.
Right. No, you have to find a way to vent a little bit of it. You can't be in a high stress mode all of the time, especially with these roles where all you're doing is carrying bodies around. You're not really the one who's affecting anybody. You're not the one who's doing any of the healing. So you've got to find a way to release some of that stress.
Right.
I can kind of relate to that, not to a life or death situation and finding it funny, but I've certainly had times at work where things were so stressful and just like one stupid, awful thing kept happening after another. And at some point you do kind of laugh. Yeah. It's just like, oh my God. So this is all just supposed to be one day so far, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Because, I mean, the timeline is so hard to figure out because, like, at first Jake was really shocked and horrified and couldn't really move or think. And then quickly he was okay and he had something to do, which I guess that was part of the thing they mentioned a few times here, that you just need to find something to keep yourself busy.
Right.
So that you can get through it. So I guess that was the point. But a lot happened in this one day. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So Jake and Julian are talking now, and Jake asks what will happen to the guy who shot himself, and Julian says he'll probably be court-martialed. Jake is surprised that after training and battle simulations that everyone wouldn't just be prepared for something like this, but of course, real life isn't the same as practice.
Yeah.
We go out to the hospital part, and Julian is chatting with the other doctor there, and she's asking for an update on the Klingon situation, and we hear that her husband is on one of the ships regrouping for an attack in this sector. She likes to stay busy to not worry about her husband. This is kind of a theme in this entire episode. Just stay busy.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's also a theme of people separated from their loved ones and not being able to actually help directly or do anything about it.
Right.
They're at the mercies of fate.
Yeah. Back in the break room again, Jake is talking to the other young guy that he's been working with. Up until now, we hadn't heard his name, so I'm just going to call him Paul Stenbeck for no particular reason.
His name is Kirby.
He heard the Farragut was intercepted and help is farther away than they thought, so they will lose the local settlement soon. Jake thinks they're safe in the hospital, but Paul Stenbeck says not to get too comfy. The Klingons don't believe in protecting medical staff. And then in a voiceover, we hear Jake say that he can't think about anything other than how close the Klingons are. He doesn't know how the others seem able to focus and not lose sleep. He's been on the station before during attacks, but this is different, and he wonders if it's because he's seen it up close this time, or if it's because his father isn't there to protect him.
Well, in the voiceover, we do learn that this guy's name is Kirby, named after the famous video game, no doubt. He talks about the Klingons and says that the Klingons kill the wounded in their beds, as they think it's giving them an honorable death.
Great.
I thought that tied really nicely to the ship.
With Worf, yeah.
Yeah, where Worf was of the opinion that Miles, if he was Muniz's friend, should give him an honorable death and basically kill him.
Yep.
I think from a cultural perspective, this really is interesting because it highlights the absolute incredible differences you would have between races, even within the Federation.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
From a Klingon's perspective, you could see them looking at what they're doing there as, why are you denying them an honorable death?
Yeah.
What you are doing is morally reprehensible.
Absolutely. Certainly dealing with anything that's religious or any kind of ritual or something that's super important to one culture that the other culture doesn't understand at all. It's bad enough on Earth.
Yeah.
And here now you've gone out into space and you've got an unlimited number of species and their particular religions and rituals and whatever. I mean, it would be impossible.
Yeah, exactly. The perspective of these two different races couldn't be more different.
Because it's always like, you don't want to completely erase the culture of someone else when somebody who was raised differently than you or comes from a different background than you comes into your world. But at the same time, in order for them to fit in and be a part of your group, they have to find a way to adapt to the larger group. And that's really hard. If we look at some of the things that they have tried to force Worf to do on TNG, Picard would give him a pretty hard time about some of the Klingon-y things that he would try to do. It's like, you're part of the Federation now. You're part of Starfleet now. You have to behave this way. You have to let go of some of those things, or you have to do those things off of the ship. Well, is that the right thing to do? I don't know. But at the same time, you do have to make all of these different cultures come together in some way.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to. You can't have him doing some of that crazy Klingon stuff on the Enterprise. That's not going to work.
Well, it's like the Trill thing, where I talk about how the Trills look at the unjoined as almost a disposable asset.
How is that the same?
Well, because if a symbiont is in danger, they'll just pull it out the Trill and let the Trill die and give it to another one.
Oh, and that's totally okay to the Trill, but not to Sisko when he turned up there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but he was on their planet, so I don't know.
Well, from the Klingons' perspective, they've made claim to this planet, so it is theirs.
That's a good point.
I think that's how it works for them.
Yeah, probably. This is such a complicated issue, and I think Star Trek tries to gloss over it by acting like that sort of American thing that everybody wants to be the American. It's like, it's really only true for, I don't know, some people in America that feel that way.
Yes, why wouldn't everybody want to be part of the Federation? Exactly,
it's very similar.
Yeah.
But I think you have to sort of gloss over it on Star Trek to bring all these different cultures together. You just have to.
Yeah.
Well, just FYI, the reason I called Kirby Paul Stenbeck is because I've seen that actor in exactly one thing, and that was As the World Turns, where he played a character called Paul Stenbeck. I've never seen him in anything else. When he turned up here, I was like, oh my, that was 20 years ago. Last time I saw that kid.
Oh, funny.
So anyway, he's Paul. Later that night, there's a nearby explosion, and the Klingons have taken out the reactor. Without power, they're going to start losing patience. So Jake and Bashir decide to head to the runabout to get a portable generator. They can't transport for some reason, of course.
Naturally.
So they have to go on foot because they need 2 people to carry the generator. Unfortunately, when they're out in the open, they come under immediate attack. We don't see anyone, but little explosions are going off all around them. And Julian says, no matter what, one of us has to get that generator.
Yeah, it looks like they're under mortar fire.
Except it's really just like little puffs of smoke that are going up around them.
Fortunately, not shrapnel weapons.
As they run, Jake loses sight of Julian in the smoke from the explosions, and then he seems to panic, and he turns around and just runs as fast as he can in the opposite direction of Julian.
And did you notice when Jake was running between the rocks, Jake is actually very strong because he actually pushes one of the giant rock boulders.
Whoops. No, I didn't see that. I was probably taking notes. That's funny.
Of course, this was me rewinding and watching it like 8 times.
Yeah, the shows aren't meant to stand up to this kind of scrutiny. After the ad break, Jake is running through what looks like a very dry California landscape.
It's funny how many planets look like California.
It's true. When he trips and falls on top of a dead Klingon, he doesn't take any weapons. I'm not sure why. He stands up and he sees bodies everywhere, and he just runs through them and eventually, of course, falls down a hill. And when he tries to get up, he gets hit in the head and he falls back down. But it's not a Klingon that hit him. It's an injured Starfleet guy who tells Jake to help sit him up because he doesn't want to die with his face in the dirt.
Oh, the battlefield scene with the corpses all strewn around. If you look in the background, there's one of the bodies with a bat'lath actually sticking out of it.
Oh my God.
I thought it was very reminiscent of like those Civil War photos.
Yeah, it was grisly.
Yeah, I was wondering whether they used those as like a template for that kind of scene.
And there was more blood in this episode than I've seen in any Star Trek episode. There's hardly ever blood when people die in Star Trek.
Yeah.
There's blood everywhere. He's covered in blood all the time. When he falls in that Klingon and he gets up, he's covered in blood. And this is like, oh, man.
Yeah.
So the Starfleet guy that hit Jake thought Jake was a Klingon. That's why he hit him. He gives Jake his water, and Jake is looking pretty upset at the sight of the guy because he's quite injured. The soldier says his platoon must have escaped. He stayed behind to make sure that they got away on a hopper. Is hopper something we've heard before on Star Trek? Because they said it like 20 times in this episode. I don't remember ever hearing that before.
No, I do not recall ever hearing it.
Like it's some kind of transport.
Probably smaller than a shuttle.
They should have shown us one.
Yeah, I guess the effects budget couldn't run to it.
I suppose. I kept picturing it as some kind of pontoon with like helicopter blades on top of it.
Oh.
So Jake wants to try and save this guy. He's really impacted by all this, of course, and he starts to cry, saying maybe he ran away for a reason so he could find this injured guy and save his life. He's desperately looking for meaning in what he's been going through. And this guy is really annoyed that Jake ran off and left his doctor behind. And then he says, life doesn't work like that. And he just dies.
Right in front of Jake.
It was bad.
Yeah.
And Jake freaks out and takes off running. I thought it was interesting, though, that he's like, oh, okay, maybe this is why I ran. This is the reason. I was supposed to find you, and then I was supposed to help you. And the guy's like, yeah, no, dude. And then he just dies.
Yep.
I thought, wow, that was grim.
Yeah, that was quickening level grim right in front of you.
A little bit. On the Defiant now, Cisco is trying to keep himself busy to not worry about Jake. Dax tells him a story about Tobin having a sick daughter, and at the end of the story, Cisco asks how it turned out, and fortunately, the daughter survived. And Cisco was like, if that story had an unhappy ending, I would have never forgiven you. That was cute, but...
You never know with Dax, though.
You don't ever know, and he didn't know.
Yeah. I thought it was great the way Dax showed a lot of empathy for what Cisco was going through. She really seemed to understand it.
She did.
And I guess this is where those memories of the previous lives come into play, and you can actually use them to help you in a situation, talking to Cisco like this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, imagine having all those memories in your head of not just...
Impossible.
The science or the things that are good, but all the negative stuff, all the stressful stuff.
No.
This is where you've talked about it before. How do they not go crazy?
No, I firmly believe it would be impossible to have that many memories. You have to be able to compartmentalize, which I would hope is part of the training.
Yeah.
But also I would hope that this is something that the symbiont has to do, that somehow the symbiont is holding back the memory somehow to regulate it.
Yeah.
Because, otherwise they would just be so overwhelming. I don't know how you would be able to go on with your daily life. If you just thought about one lifetime's worth of regrets, how hard that would be to get up and keep going. And now you've got however many lifetimes of it. It's just, oh my gosh, it's a lot to think about.
That's an interesting idea that the symbionts themselves can actually act as a gateway to these emotions to stop them just flooding you.
Yeah, gotta be something. Yeah. I wonder, too, if it's the physiology of the Trill. Maybe they have something that regulates too much memory or too much empathy, too much caring.
Right. They could control it. They could look at it. And like you said, compartmentalize it.
Yeah.
This is stuff I'm going to let through and feel at this point. This is stuff I'm going to ignore or can just turn off.
But this thing that you were saying about how the Trill can just look at a big part of their population as lesser.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's why.
Oh.
They have the ability to just turn that off, or they're naturally less sympathetic to others.
That it can be very focused.
Maybe.
Ooh, interesting idea.
If there wasn't a way for you to turn that down, it might be impossible to take on a symbiont that's had a couple of lifetimes.
Wow, that would be fascinating.
I still continue to say the Trill is the most interesting species.
Well, imagine it. If in this situation, the symbiont or Jadzia as a Trill is saying, I want to relate to Cisco, so I'm going to feel the emotions from this situation.
Yes.
But the majority of the time,
I don't.
All my other emotions are cut off.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, that's, more interesting headcanon, Kim. That was a really good one.
Thank you. I don't know. I got a lot going on in my head about the Trill.
Right.
Ferengi, not so much. Back at the underground hospital, Jake has found his way back. His new friend, Paul Stenbeck, sees him and he's totally shocked. They all thought he was dead. Jake says he got knocked out on the way to the runabout and then he got lost. So he's not being honest.
He kind of got knocked out.
He did, but not on his way to the runabout. He was runabouting away from the runabout.
Runabouting away.
He asks about Dr. Bashir, and he's greatly relieved to hear that he made it back. But he's in the ICU with plasma burns. Somehow he managed to carry the generator back by himself. Paul Stenbeck says they went looking for Jake but couldn't find him, and he tells him to go and see Julian. In the ICU, Julian is greatly relieved to see that Jake is alive. He apologizes for bringing Jake here, and Jake snaps at him. He's feeling so guilty for running away.
Oh, yeah.
He's a mess. He later tries writing about it, but the only explanation he can come up with is that he's a coward. He's racked with guilt that no one knows what he did.
Yeah, he's basically consumed by guilt. It's a very interesting portrayal here. Lofton's doing a great job, by the way.
He's doing pretty well. Later, Jake delivers food to the guy who shot himself in the foot. This guy says he wants to get a job on a mining team where it's safer. He says, 1 minute your life is moving along and then you do something that makes you realize you're not who you thought you were, which of course is exactly what Jake is going through.
Yeah.
He was always great in the simulations, but the real thing isn't the same. He says he doesn't deserve to be in Starfleet. Nothing is going to change what he did. And then he implies that he wishes he just killed himself.
Ugh.
Again, not helping Jake with the guilt.
Jake can very clearly relate to this guy. Exactly what he's feeling.
Totally. Later, Jake is resting in the break room while the others talk about how close the Klingons are getting. And they joke about whether they want to die from a bat'leth or a disruptor. And Jake doesn't take this lighthearted conversation very well. And the worst is the blue bullion guy saying, if you get decapitated, the last thing you might see is your own headless body. I mean, come on now.
That's full-on gallows humor.
Oh my goodness. Jake kind of freaks out and he starts shouting about how stupid everything is. Now, none of this is funny, and Julian grabs him and takes him out of the room. But outside, Jake still can't admit what he's upset about. Julian says he can see something is bothering him, but Jake won't tell him. And after Julian leaves, Jake just breaks down and he starts to cry. It's horrible.
Yeah, I would have thought Julian might have pressed a bit more to try and find it out, but maybe he just put it down to it being an extremely stressful situation. Plus, Julian's got dozens of other people to deal with there.
Right. And also, Jake is an adult at this point. So if he doesn't want to talk about it, he doesn't have to talk about it. I think to a really large degree, this is some of the stuff we talked about before, where Jake is maybe not able to mature in kind of a natural way being on that station because he's just so isolated from other people of his age. And maybe this is kind of a natural thing that's going to happen. Yeah. He's used to being protected, and now he's on his own. And it's not that he's a coward. It's just that he hasn't had a chance to mature on his own, and he needs that. Everybody needs that.
That's really true. I could see how you could very much make an argument that he has literally lived a sheltered life.
He has.
Part of that is, I think, he almost got killed with his mother.
Yep.
And I could see Sisko's reaction to that is trying to keep Jake as safe as possible.
I think that's a huge part of this story.
That's a great point.
And I also think that's what The Visitor was about.
Yeah.
But I don't think Sisko has learned the lesson yet. And I don't know if he will from this either, because obviously this is as far as I've seen. But I do think he has really been sheltering him, and I don't blame him. Oh, very hard. Parenting is terrible. It's too hard. Well, the Klingons eventually hit the compound, and the main doctor gives evacuation instructions. Everyone starts running around and moving patients.
It seems to be complete chaos, and Jake just doesn't know what to do.
No, and he's hiding in the break room under a table when the ceiling starts falling in, so he has to get out of that room. But it's kind of too late because the Klingons are there, and they are shooting at him and all the other people who are running away. Jake instinctively ducks, and he hides under another little table, and he just grabs a phaser rifle that I guess he found on the floor, and he starts firing into the air without looking. And it's very clear that he's just shooting into the air, and he's not looking at what he's shooting at.
Yeah, he's just pointing it over the table.
Yes, exactly. I have seen this in video of robberies with people who are just like shooting and not looking. And I just thought, it's very similar here where you're in a panic. So I thought that was pretty realistic. Eventually, he manages to shoot the ceiling over the Klingons and it collapses on them.
Well, the whole ceiling comes down on the Klingons and Jake.
Yes.
I felt bad for the security officers here. Why can't they hit anything?
I don't know.
The one guy who grabbed Jake to help him out, he lasted about 2 seconds and then was shot.
I know. Jake is going to have some guilt over this whole episode.
Yeah, and then the other woman who was taking cover behind, and there was some desks or whatever. And then when she goes to leave, she stands straight up and like walks in front of the Klingons shooting her.
I don't know. There's always somebody like that. And there's just 2 Klingons and they're standing right in the doorway.
They're walking side by side down the corridor.
Yes.
And nobody can hit them.
Yes, just shoot them. Jake, without looking, managed to bring him down.
I would like to question the kind of training they're doing at Starfleet.
Yeah, it's not good. Maybe these were all just cadets. Who knows? Later, Jake wakes up to find Julian and Sisko hovering over him. Julian came back for him when he realized Jake wasn't on the hopper.
Yeah, and you see the tunnel is completely blocked.
Yeah, Sisko says the ceasefire is back on and the Klingons are pulling out. He says to Jake that sealing the entryway was risky because he nearly brought the ceiling down on himself. And Julian says if he hadn't sealed the entrance, they wouldn't have gotten the patients out. He tells Jake he's a hero, but of course, Jake knows what really happened.
Yeah.
In a voiceover, Jake says he was just as scared in that room as he was earlier when he ran away. And on the Defiant, they showed Julian and Sisko reading Jake's article. At least I think that's what Julian was reading.
Oh, yeah.
In the voiceover, Jake says he learned the line between courage and cowardice is a lot thinner than most people believe. Sisko tells him anyone who's been in battle can relate to his story, though most wouldn't admit it.
I thought that was good.
Yeah. He says it takes courage to look inside yourself and even more to write it for others to see. And he says, I'm proud of you, son. And he gives Jake a big hug. And apparently everything is fixed because Jake has a big grin on his face as he hugs him.
This is the best dad in the world.
Oh, 100%. The end. Well, what is your overanalysis?
Well, there's a lot to talk about here, I think.
Okay.
Isn't this the first voiceover episode?
Well, there were some voiceovers in The Visitor. Maybe Jake just always has voiceover episodes.
Oh, okay. That's true. Yeah.
It's not a frequent thing they use on Star Trek, but it has been done.
I thought it really worked here.
Well, they kind of needed to do it because you couldn't just look at Jake's face and understand all this stuff that was going on.
And he wasn't going to tell anyone, so the inner monologue was required.
Yeah, it worked.
My next point.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way you could blame Jake for his actions earlier. He's had no training for the situation.
Yeah.
He's had no experience of it. Not even like basic training, like the military.
Yeah.
So his reactions are completely understandable as someone that is literally a civilian.
100%. I would run away.
Being shelled or mortared is probably terrifying if you've never experienced it.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. He was in the right.
Yeah.
Why did Julian take him as the one to go to the runabout? That was a fatal mistake, I thought. Take one of the Starfleet dudes.
Right. That would make a lot more sense.
That didn't make any
sense. But it
wouldn't
be good for the story, so.
Yeah. I do understand. Let's hand wave our way to that part of the story.
Next thing, self-inflicted wound guy.
Yeah.
Why would this necessarily be a court-martial offense? Starfleet is not a military organization.
Mm-hmm.
So why would it function purely like a military command?
I don't know. That's very cloudy to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Surely, at this point in the future, and with Starfleet, they would understand there are some people that are simply not suitable for combat.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be races that are fully pacifist and would not want anything to do with combat or fighting. And even with the guys you've trained like this, surely some of them, once they got into a combat situation, they would not be able to handle it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't see them being so rigid that you would throw away all that training as a Starfleet officer just because they weren't necessarily cut out for combat. Right. Some races probably never even were. And thinking about this, even in World War I, although they weren't necessarily treated well, there were conscientious objectors who actually served in non-combat roles. So surely Starfleet in this situation would go, look, don't put this guy in combat, but he's a really good astrophysicist, or we can use him on exploration missions where we're cutting asteroids in half and seeing what's inside them. Why would you treat him purely militarily?
No, I agree. I think about Barclay on Next Gen. He was afraid all the time. If being afraid was going to get you court-martialed, then that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
I do think they confuse themselves sometimes of making Starfleet a combination of the military and not the military. I think that causes them some trouble in the story. But I agree with you. I didn't get that. Really, what was his crime here? I think his crime was, putting aside anything about the military, I think his crime was that he was wasting resources, really precious resources, right, in this medical facility. But other than that, what was his real crime? I don't know. I totally agree. That was in my notes, too.
I'm sure if you want to keep him away from anything dangerous, you could give him the role of assistant astrophysicist, which I think the boring version of Picard was.
Oh, the one where he sees what his life looks like if he doesn't get stabbed in the heart. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, precisely.
So next point, ground troops versus drones. If you had enough drones, surely it would make any kind of infantry pretty much obsolete.
Yeah, the infantry thing makes no sense to me in the future. Unless it's just that Klingons have a bloodlust that they have to fulfill somehow by stabbing people. That's the only way it makes any sense.
But even then, imagine with Star Trek technology, the Klingons are all wanting to have this nice ground combat and running at you with their batleths.
Yeah.
And you literally just carpet the area with drones.
Yeah. No, it makes no sense.
Game over.
I'm sorry, but you and I had this discussion way back when the movie Starship Troopers came out, remember?
Yeah.
It was just like, I don't know about this.
All I can say is we dust off and nuke them from orbit. Next thing. So I've gone back and actually rewatched this episode a number of times, hence why I was noticing things like the rocks moving when Jake was touching them.
Okay.
Because I'm really not sure what the point of this story is. Whether this is an anti-war story or it is a pro-war gung-ho hero story. Written at a time where we'd been at peace for a fair number of years at that point. We didn't have any real conflicts that were ongoing. The Gulf War was like 7 years earlier. I couldn't really decide whether this was sort of a nobility of combat thing, where the heroes are forged in the fiery crucible, or whether it was saying, this is kind of awful. I felt it was such an odd, mixed message. What did you take?
Yeah. Well, part of me thought they're just making MASH.
Yeah.
Somebody liked MASH and they wanted to make MASH.
Yeah.
I think many times on this show, there's something that they're trying to do and they make an episode around it, and it doesn't necessarily make sense. I felt like here they were trying to make a story that emulated maybe some war movie that they liked, or TV show, or something that I would never have seen because I can't stand those things and I don't watch them. But that's my feeling. Yeah. Hey, we're having a Klingon war. I'm going to make a war movie and talk about the horror of war.
Interesting.
And it's like, okay, but does that really fit on Star Trek?
So you didn't think it was really going for either approach? It was just going for, we want to remake something we like?
No, because I didn't really feel like they went far enough in any direction for me to get that feeling. I mean, they were certainly showing you the horror of ground wars, right, with all the blood and everything. But they weren't really talking about the war itself or the reasons for it. And they certainly paid no attention to the Klingons. There were only 2 Klingons alive in this episode, and then, I don't know, a couple of bodies. So I don't think it went far enough to make any big statement. I think you could step back, try to give them maybe a more noble reason for this by saying they're just trying to find a really affecting way to impact Jake's life and Jake's growth.
Yeah.
And it's really a very important part of his character development. Maybe, but again, I'm not sure this is the way to do it. It just felt like a weird episode where this is a thing I liked. I don't know any war movies, but I'm going to make an episode about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I couldn't decide really which way it was going.
Because it wasn't clear. It was a very weird episode.
Final thing.
Okay.
And this came from multiple rewatchings. I think it's really great the way you get to see the contrast between Jake at the beginning and that very gung-ho attitude where he says to Bashir, I can handle it, I'm a Cisco. And then at the end with the more circumspect Jake, who now has some real war experience and has some actually understanding about these kind of things, about the kind of things his father has been involved in.
Right.
Because his father's fought in wars before.
Yeah.
And I think it really comes out in the rewatching, the change in Jake from beginning to end. And it's a really nice touch. Mm-hmm. And I thought Serac really made it work.
Jake needs to go back to Earth. He needs to go live a life somewhere else.
He needs to be in that kitchen working with his grandpa.
Yeah. Chopping vegetables.
Yeah. And that wraps it up for my overanalysis. Over to you.
So at the end, when Bashir was reading the article, what did you think the look on his face meant?
I think it ties into, some people have said this, I know we've had emails about it and there's been other stuff written about it, that Bashir has some characteristics that hint towards autism. And I don't know if it's just, maybe it's his training, but even then, Bashir hasn't had, as far as we know, a lot of training or experience outside Deep Space Nine. he seems really good at turning off his emotions and being very focused.
Yeah, he does.
There might be some reasons for this coming up in future episodes, which I won't give you spoilers for, but it does seem like when he was talking at the beginning and he's very focused on sort of the science, and it seems like he can not see what's happening around him. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, that seems accurate.
And then when he's reading this thing, it's sort of like he's realizing all the things he's missed, that he wasn't picking up on these things with Jake.
Yeah, so you think it's shock.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising. It's not that he's upset or annoyed. It's more sort of, oh, wow, I didn't see any of this. So it's that kind of inability to empathize or relate to pick up the social cues around him, that kind of thing.
Okay. Because I watched it a few times trying to understand what that look on his face meant, and I couldn't interpret it because it almost looked like annoyance.
Yeah.
And I was like, is he mad because Jake wasn't honest with him, or he didn't see what really happened? But then I thought, well, I'm not sure annoyance even makes sense. So I kind of wish they hadn't shown that, because I was really confused by that, and I didn't know what I was supposed to take from it.
Oh, well, it obviously worked. It got us talking about it.
Well, I guess.
We both have different takes what that meant.
I guess, yeah. Although I was very surprised that this article was ready while they were on the Defiant, because I would think it would take a little time to write it and edit it and, be prepared to share it. But somehow he already had it ready. That seemed unrealistic.
Well, we've seen that when scary space aliens try to suck his brains out, he can write articles very quickly.
That's true. Whole novels.
Yeah. What do you think of my assessment of Bashir, of those elements of the character?
I think that's something we haven't really talked about before. And it does make sense that he has the ability to really be focused on the situation, whatever it is. And we've certainly seen that he lacks the ability to empathize with other people. Yeah. So that makes sense. And I guess if he truly is somewhere on that spectrum, that maybe there are some things that just he's not going to naturally do or naturally think. So I guess it makes sense. I'm just not sure it was portrayed perfectly there at the end. Just even, one sentence or something. Give me something to explain what that face meant, because I just really didn't get it.
Interesting. I thought this episode very clearly demonstrated how focused and detached Bashir could be, which in this situation is very much a skill.
Yeah, absolutely required in a situation like that. Another point I had, I mentioned this before, but I don't think it made any sense that Julian took Jake to carry the generator. That just didn't make any sense. If he was really trying to keep him safe, why would he do that? And also at some point, they had to be able to access the transporter on the runabout.
Okay, there was a line about how they had so many scramblers that they couldn't transport.
Okay, Star Trek hand wave. All right, I'll accept that. I don't remember that, but now that you said it, it kind of rings a bell. Okay.
Yeah.
And then my last item here is that there's a point in this episode where Dax says something about coffee can never be too hot, and I just need to say this is not true. This is scientifically not true. Coffee can be too hot and destroy the taste of it. So I just needed to write that down in my overanalysis.
That's a point against Dax there for her coffee.
That's a point against Dax. Come on, Dax. Okay, so let's go to women in the future. Not a lot to say here. The stuff with Kira was again dumb, and they made a joke about the Ferengi women, just being rental space for babies. I mean, it's just horrible, and it brings everything down in an episode when they do that. Highly disappointing. And they continue to make these little jokes, and in such a serious episode, it really pulls me out of it, and it really distresses me. And I'm just going to be honest that it's because I've put up with some of these kind of jokes as a woman in a work environment where the guys just think it's funny and, hey, it's just a joke. Well, you know what? It's not a joke. It's my whole life. So I don't like it. And I'm never going to appreciate it on any TV shows, but I'm especially not going to appreciate it on a show set in the future where equality is supposed to mean something. That's my whole women in the future section. So let's go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
An unequivocal thumbs up. Even though I'm not quite sure what the direction of this episode was, the portrayal of Jake was really good. It was very enjoyable.
I don't know what rating to give it.
Really?
There was some really good stuff in the episode. I thought the acting was really good. Yes, Sirach Lofton as Jake was really good. The scenes where he was crying, I mean, it was quite impactful, and I think he did a really good job with it. There were other scenes, too, where he was just confused and didn't know what to do, and I thought all that was good. I also thought the other regular characters' acting was pretty good, and I liked the little scene between Dax and Sisko. All those things were good.
Yeah.
But, and this isn't even because of the thing that I said about the women in the future. I don't like that stuff, but it was one small thing, and that's really not what's impacting me here. I'm struggling to find the Star Trek in this episode. Where was the Trek?
Oh.
I think I've mentioned this before, but the hopefulness of the future is a thing that I really like about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's what the rest of this show is like, because this is now the second super grim episode I feel that we've seen. I don't mind sad. I don't mind emotional, but grim I find hard. I'm not sure I signed up to watch a show about ground troops and people getting their body parts hacked off and jokes about decapitation. I'm just not sure that's the Star Trek I want to watch. So I think there's a lot of good stuff in it, but as a Star Trek episode, I didn't like it.
Yeah.
So I'm really on the fence because I hate to thumbs down an episode where so much good acting occurred and so much character development occurred. Yeah. So I guess I'm going to sit on the fence.
Oh.
I'm going to neutral it.
Neutral, huh?
I might change my mind later and give a different rating.
Wow.
I just don't know where the Trek is. Can you tell me? What am I missing?
Well, they got a ceasefire with the Klingons, so that's kind of Trekky.
Yeah, but those things usually happen off screen, and they just tell me about it. They read it in a briefing.
This episode is showing you the stuff that happens before.
I'm not sure that's the Trek I signed up for.
Well, this episode kind of reminds me of the original series episode, Errand of Mercy, which had sort of Star Trek-y science at the end, but if you use similar criteria to what you're saying, isn't a terribly Star Trek episode.
It's not full of blood, though.
True. The networks probably would have got upset about that then. I'm claiming parallels.
I'm not the world's biggest original series fan, so I'm not going to defend the original series.
I'm just saying there's a parallel here.
Okay, and that's a valid point, but I am on the hill with my TNG flag. Let me just put it that way. That's the Trek I believe in.
Yeah.
That's the Trek I love. And this didn't feel like that.
Interesting.
There's a lot of times on this show where it doesn't, but it still feels Trekky. But
yeah.
This episode didn't do it for me. I'm sorry, Sirach Lofton. Good job in it. But I'm so sorry.
Oh.
I don't want to watch it again.
Oh.
I've now seen it twice. I'm good.
Not on your rewatch list.
No. All right, that concludes Season 5, Episode 4. Come back next week for Episode 5. In the meantime, if you'd like to send us your own overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, you can email us at rebingeit@gmail.com or tweet us at rebingeit. We're also on Instagram at rebingeit, and we're on YouTube at rebingeit. You can also check us out on talkthroughmedia.com. You can leave feedback there for individual episodes, and you can listen to the other Star Trek podcasts in our network, including Star Trek Prodigy, which is another pod that James and I do.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.